I wonder if this may be Norwich City's busiest summer yet for the club in a long while, and that's just with no relegation from the England's top division either. From what Norwich fans have just seen in the last 9 months, they could sum it up in 4 words: a waste of time, perhaps. Time is their friend right now, though, as Norwich have a lot to do this summer. But if there was anything to even celebrate, it was probably from own player achievements. I'm talking about Bora Signs and Josh Sargent. Even then, the neutrals and maybe some Norwich fans are even surprised to see them appear in several Team of the Seasons. Will we even see them at the club next season? It's not just about them. As we record this video on this day being the 23rd of May, we're now on day 14 with no new manager confirmed at Norwich City. There are rumours, of course. Yes, we now know that Jack Wilshere won't be head coach, yet was it even fair for Johannes Hoff Torup to even leave in the first place? And what was the thought process from sporting director Ben Knapper to relieve him from his duties? Plus, no Angus Gunn next season, among with others too. Just how important of a window is this summer one now coming up for Ben Knapper? There must be a lot of pressure on the ex-Arsenal football analyst, as Norwich fans simply have all eyes on this man right now for whatever decision will happen next from him. It's your time to repair all this mess, Ben Knapper, and it's our time to think where we start first in the overload of work that Norwich need to do this summer. As joining me today is local Norwich journalist from the PinkUn, Sam Seaman. Welcome to the channel, Sam. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
Really good, mate. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Really good to have you. Firstly, I mentioned it in the intro there, but where does this summer for you rank with just how busy it may be for the club? And have Norwich even experienced anything just as busy as what they may just now experience in the next few months?
Yes, it's really interesting. It does feel like it's right up there. I think probably in terms of the busyness and the importance of different summer windows, I think you're probably looking at, first of all, last summer, which obviously was a massively important one, and also one with loads of change. That was when Johannes Torup actually came in, and when things sort of started moving a little bit in terms of the sorts of players that he wanted, that Ben Knapper wanted to sort of work with as well, in terms of those sorts of profile of players. So yeah, I think it's really interesting when you compare those, because actually, obviously, even though it's only 12 months on from that, it does feel like it's almost as big a summer. I think probably if you look back at the 2017 summer, yeah, just getting my dates right, and 2018, obviously they were similarly big. So although I don't want to just keep making that comparison, because I'm well aware that's been made plenty of times now over the last couple of years, it does feel like if you had 2 summers to completely change things then, and you do it again this summer, then maybe that is almost a similar process. But this summer, obviously, they've got to get another new head coach. So when you add that into the mix, it does feel like one of the most busy summers. It's hard to say among those 4, but I think those 4 are probably the top 4 for a long, long time. And yeah, it's definitely, I think, in the top sort of 2 or 3 over the last maybe decade or the last couple of decades, really.
Yeah, and surprisingly, that's not even with a relegation from the Premier League as such. But obviously, like the whole kind of busyness to find a head coach lies on the hands of Ben Knapper and the owners. The fact that they've given Johannes Hoff Torup the sack. It was a project that at least majority of all fans, really, including myself being a Norwich fan, we were all invested in Project Johannes, as we'll call it here. Norwich looked really good in that first half of the season. The second half, it wasn't as good. But I mean, did things in the second half though really create so much turmoil for Ben Knapper and the owners, to the point which led to Johannes getting the boot?
It's so difficult to say. I mean, I think in terms of those timelines, yes, you are right that second half of the season, that was what changed things, really. I mean, you look at the first half of the season and it was almost ahead of the curve, and in a sense, I think how well Norwich played in those first few months almost set Johannes off Torrent back, because you could look at that performance against Watford. There's one against Hull as well, a couple against Plymouth and Luton when they didn't have Josh Sargent, but they still looked very dominant. And you look at those and you compare them to how it went in the second half of the season, and that's probably what led to the decision, because there just wasn't that improvement. And it's easy for anyone to say, give someone time, but ultimately I think you speak to people at the club, and it does feel like they recognize that playoffs weren't the be all and end all, but they needed to see that progression, and they weren't really seeing that progression. I think if they had finished seventh, having come from 14th, at Christmas, then that would have actually been a very positive way for them to go into this season. And I've got no doubt that Torop would be in charge. But yeah, I think that second half of the season probably is what did for him. But then it becomes an even more complex debate, because it's down to your opinion as to whether you think Torop would turn it around. I think a lot of fans had started to feel like he wouldn't. But then you look at those Farke comparisons that I made earlier, how similar those two situations were. Norwich didn't really end the 2017-18 season much better than they started it either. So it's really hard to say, and I don't feel as confident as some people in just saying that it was going in the wrong direction. It was definitely the right decision. I don't think I'd say it was definitely the wrong decision either. And I don't wish to just sit on the fence, but I think at this point, I don't know how you feel about it. But for me, it's almost impossible to do anything but sit on the fence. I don't think we can really decide whether it was the right decision until we see what happens from here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It for me right now, I've paused my reaction just because this next move is crucial. It's kind of one of them questions where it can only be answered probably like, well, a year from now, really, when we get our next coach in and see how he performs. I mean, I felt there was kind of more emphasis on Johannes rather than the team itself with this second half. Like I felt Knapper himself was quite quick to point the finger at the head coach, and I get a lot lies there to the head coach, but there's certain situations where, okay, let's look at the reality, and there are injuries involved. There's perhaps players coming back, and whether this is the coach's fault or just the own individual's fault, but Bora signs in this particular topic being inconsistent. Was he still was not the same after an injury? But I felt there was more emphasis on that team rather than the coaching when it came to the reason behind the defeats. And I guess it's one of them topics again where you can sit on the fence with it. But was it the case of low effort performances or just simply bad coaching from your own point of view? It's a hard one to ask that.
Yes. Well, I think in football it's always a bit of everything. You can never say it's 100% one thing and 0% the other thing. I think the word effort is a really interesting word, because to me there's no doubt. I think you look at the way that the team was playing. You look at, to be honest, some of the videos that the club have put out of, and there was that one, I think that sort of 30-second clip of Torup speaking about the playoffs and asking who believed in it, who believed it was possible, where actually the players came off pretty badly in that. And although I wouldn't say there was a lack of effort, I think whenever you go out on the pitch and you've got that pressure of 25,000 fans wanting you to win, I don't think it's ever a case of just you can't be bothered. But I think mentally you really need to be tuned in, and you need that next level of concentration and that almost that fire going through your veins a little bit. I remember Farke used to talk about, was it you need fire in your belly, cool heads and fire in your belly or something.
Something like that. I don't German philosophy.
Yeah. That's an absolute classic from him. The sparkle, but I feel like Norwich maybe lacked that fire in their belly a little bit. Not necessarily for a conscious lack of trying, but I think there was a tangible difference in that. Just that little tiny, at this level, the margins are so small that when you lose 2% of your desire, and that can pretty much lose you games. And so I think some of it is on the players, but then there's also the school of thought that a good manager is able to motivate players, and that's part of their job.
That,
So
I guess I'll rephrase it, because I mean this was actually going to be my next question. Was it that lack of, and I'm going to get onto Jack Wilshere in a minute. But was it that lack of that relationship between the players and Johannes? Because I mean, it's hats off to the media team. It's been like really incredible content we've seen with just getting insider looks with the post match and the training ground and what have you from the Norwich YouTube account. But it looks so well from a fan's perspective, from watching it on the screens, from seeing it in person at Carrow Road. But I do feel at times there was that lack of love and relationship for Johannes from certain individuals in the team that right now that we see.
Yeah, I think he is a very different type of coach to what has been at the club in the last few years, and definitely in English football. I mean, you look at the number of players, especially when he came in before they started to root out those players, but even by the end, he had the likes of Shane Duffy, Kenny McLean, Grant Hanley was there for half a season. A lot of players who've been around English football for a long time and worked under David Wagner. I'm not trying to dig out specific players or experienced players. I don't think that's... Ultimately, we aren't in the dressing room and we can't decide who got on with Johannes the best and who didn't. But just from what you hear about the way that both of those coaches operated behind the scenes, I felt like there were probably a lot of players, just looking at the history of their careers, who won't have played under somebody like Johannes. They will have spent years and years under somebody like David Wagner. Obviously, before him, it was Dean Smith, who was a sort of similarly old school manager, in that sense in English football. And I just think the departure from Wagner to Torrent was so severe. I mean, Wagner was, to be fair to him, excellent at getting those players behind him and motivating them and creating that siege mentality. And I think in that dressing room at that point, when they got to the playoffs, there really was that feeling of, Norwich against the world, and they wanted to prove everyone wrong. And I think Johannes had a bit more of a calculated, methodical way of doing things. Not to say that Wagner didn't have his methods, but I think Torok just approached things in a completely different way. And when that's not what you're used to, I think as a player, maybe you react to that in a different way. And I do think that was part of it, definitely the sort of man management side of it, and how well the players took to what Johannes was trying to do.
Yeah, no, hugely. And I mean, we got an insight, and with just Jack Wilshere at the lead and reign of it all, really. And I guess that will be my next question, really. Was there that kind of insight from Knapper that these players are levitating way more towards Jack Wilshere, towards his beliefs, towards himself as a more of a head coach figure? They see him as more of that than they are from Johannes, and was that why there was just that kind of short-term picture decision from Knapper to just go with Wilshere, have the confidence in him?
I find it difficult to explain that Wilshere decision, to be honest, especially when...
So do I.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's because he talked about wanting to be a head coach, and it was obviously, if he tells the media that he feels he's ready to be a head coach, you can be sure that Ben Knapper knew weeks before any of us that he was probably ready for that. So putting him in that position, especially without telling him, by the way, this isn't permanent. They waited until after the end of the season to do that.
Yeah,
I found that a little bit confusing, to be honest, because I think obviously he's never going to be the head coach, because Knapper spoke about wanting at least a little bit of first team experience, and he didn't have that. So why put him in that position for 2 games and risk losing it? Because I think now that he's been in that position, he's dropped out of that position, and it's looking very, very likely, obviously, that he then will leave the club. I mean, you just up the chances of him leaving. You create the uncertainty with 2 games left of the season when you could have just waited until the end of the season. So I suppose there is the minor benefit of being able to get that head coach search started a little bit earlier. But we know from the fact that, from how much scouting and conversations they had with Torup before before Wagner was officially sacked. We know that they can do that background work while they've still got someone in place. So, yeah, that I found that a little bit of a baffling decision, to be honest. But to actually answer your question about the relationship with the players, that was the one bit probably that made a lot of sense because yeah,
Yeah,
definitely they really just to end the season on a high, I think he was the best option.
yeah.
But in the long term, it did feel a little bit of a strange decision putting him in that position. Yeah.
Yeah, because I felt myself, and I kind of expressed the views on X, Twitter as such, but I just feel it kind of, as a club itself, I just feel we belittle ourselves in employing Jack Wilshere, and it's nothing against Jack Wilshere. I think this is a great stepping stone for him to become a head coach if we're gonna talk about himself. But
Yeah.
there's other, like, let's just take Russell Martin as a classic example. There was a reason why MK Dons was his first job to really prove himself in the English Football League, and Swansea was that next job with just a lot of added pressure. But Swansea appointed him on the basis that, like, obviously a recent Premier League team, a team who have been in the Championship for a long while, a bit like us now, it feels. But and Swansea got Russell Martin on the basis of there's proof there that he can do things, and they've appointed him on the basis of experience, and I feel if we'd appointed Jack Wilshere on anything really, it was just because of the players levitating towards him. Do we know if he can manage all them 46 games and really get results out of them? That's the bigger question and the more important one. And I don't know. It just I don't know what your opinion was on it, but like, did this? I mean, Jack had like we just touched up on there. Jack had an incredible relationship, as we've seen, with the players and everything. And I mean, the last games of the season, them two that he managed, you could really see it then too. But does this really kind of? It's going to be a stepping stone for any kind of new coach coming in. But did it feel a bit like the Jack Wilshere show a bit, and a bit of a stepping stone for him? And I mean, if he got the job, of course, his head and his ambition is just going to be with Norwich, and he's going to do the best he can. We all know that. But did this kind of feel a bit of a, let me just kind of prove what I can do with no experience and kind of get on with it?
I'd probably say no, just because he didn't get the job permanently.
No,
I think,
for sure, which I'm glad about, but myself, in my own opinion. But
yeah, I mean, for those two games, it did feel a bit, every national media outlet. It was Jack Wilshere, and it was it felt almost like Torup hadn't been sacked. Wilshere was just in charge from some of that coverage. Obviously, fair enough, and we all know the size of the name, and there was the game against Aaron Ramsey, which probably didn't help with that.
Yeah, but, no, it did, and I remember in between. I think it was in between them last two games. James Maddison done his invitational golf event, and Jack Wilshere went to it, and I think it was in between anyway. But I know TalkSports got him on the radio station, and they kind of chatted a bit about Norwich, about him being the new head coach and everything. But I mean, I'm looking at it obviously from a fan's point of view at that, but I'm just thinking, what has happened? It kind of angered me a little of just, like, let's just open to all these other media opportunities. And I know nothing's going to come from them last two games. No promotion's going to come from them last two games. But is really the look into what we're going to get from Jack Wilshere already as a head coach. Norwich needs to be your 100% basis if you're going to be a manager at this club.
Yeah.
And it was with Johannes. Would it have been necessarily with Jack, is what I'm getting at.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's the difficult thing, but ultimately, first of all, ultimately he didn't get the job, so that's probably that's the biggest point. But then there's also the fact that I completely understand where you're coming from, and I did see all of that, and sometimes it's definitely it's not nice when this is a lot of people's lives and it's their football club to maybe get that feeling that one person is bigger than the club, but also. It's not Jack Wilshere's fault that he's played for England, that he's played for Arsenal. Ultimately, now he's somebody who's had that ability previously in his career. He's been able to play at those really high heights, and now he wants a career in management. So
no,
the alternative is he stays at Arsenal, where he will always be smaller than the club. and just but then that's not really very good for his career. So
No, no, of course not.
for him, I feel sorry. I feel sorry for him. I don't think it's really anything you can get around because ultimately, for every Jack Wilshere who doesn't get the job at Norwich, for every Wayne Rooney who's struggled, there's a Carlo Ancelotti or an Antonio Conte or a Zinedine Zidane who have had great playing careers and then gone on to actually be very good coaches
Yeah,
and
yeah.
win things at the highest level. So yeah, I feel for him a little bit. I don't think it's really you can really criticize anyone for that.
No, no,
It's
no,
just the way things are. But I'm not saying you were, but
no.
I can completely understand where you're coming from, and for clubs like Norwich, when it feels like it's Jack Wilshere FC sometimes.
Yeah, no, no.
Outside Norfolk, I can understand that. Yeah,
I guess it was that kind of passionate side for me. I mean, for me, I felt we need a bounce back before we become too nestled into this championship table, and a bounce back for me is for a manager who's had the experience before. As personally for me, I didn't think Jack was the right manager, but of course other fans did, and I get that
yeah.
completely. There was that close connection that he had with the players and some of the fans, like I said. Obviously, yeah, the main kind of question with this search for the new managers online right now, people are getting impatient with it, and I know why, but then again, there's a summer to sort it out. You obviously want to sort it out sooner than later, but where are we kind of right now with the search?
Well, it's an interesting time to be asking me that because about half an hour ago, my colleague Paddy Davitt has put out a story. Um, I'll just read out the first few parts.
Yeah, go for it,
You
mate.
know,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
anyone who hasn't seen it, Liam Manning, Pep Lijnders, and Gary O'Neill are believed to have made the final cut in Norwich City's head coach search. Sporting director Ben Knapper has also identified three other potential overseas options, although Christian Titz and Brian Prisk are understood not to be in the running. Russell Martin was never a candidate. Obviously, runs through a few of the other options, but basically the headline there is that yeah, the three of the domestic options that are really now in the final stages of
Mm.
this decision being made are Liam Manning, Pep Lijnders, and Gary O'Neill. So I don't think that's really adding any particularly new names uh, to the frame. But in terms of the fact that they've um, basically they've now whittled it down, and
Yeah.
Manning, Lijnders, and Gary O'Neill are part of a very small group of managers who they're now choosing from. So yeah, that's the latest. Sorry, I went a bit into robot mode there, but I was basically this article went out after we started this podcast. So yeah, it's all breaking a little bit right now, but
Yeah, no, no,
yeah,
no,
those
no. I'm glad as well because they're kind of the three names I've got as well. To be fair, yeah, I mean, firstly, I mean, I saw a tweet literally just before we recorded, from just the change of ownership at Bristol City. Does that kind of further anything with Liam Manning? Do you think in terms of a change up there? Does Liam now jump ship and join Norwich?
it's really interesting because in one way you could say it makes it less likely because I think he's talked about sort of the lack of transfer spend, the fact that they
Yeah.
haven't spent as much as others in the division. So part of you would go. I must say I haven't gone into that too much, but if there is a change of ownership, then part of you thinks, well, he might get a bit more backing. Um,
Yeah.
but I suppose the uncertainty is never going to help anyone. Whenever that happens, the new owners will have ambitions of their own. You don't know what they're going to want to change. So I don't think uncertainty is good for any head coach, especially in an industry that's already absolutely rife with it. So uh, maybe it does sort of push things in Norwich's direction a little bit. But I have to say, I think, and I hope I've managed to remove my Norwich bias here when I say this, but I think that very marginally Norwich is a slightly more appealing job, a slightly bigger club than Bristol City, probably a little bit more money to spend, and obviously for Manning on a personal level, he's from the area, so I think
Yeah.
it helped in that sense as well. So I think he probably already had enough motivators, but yeah, I don't think uncertainty is ever good for anyone. So
No. No.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably is in a minor sense. Maybe that would help Norwich.
Yeah, no. I get completely what you mean by that, and I mean, I think Liam himself, with how close he got Bristol City with them playoffs last season,
Yeah,
this season, if as we'll still
it's
probably
hard,
call
isn't
it
it? It's
that,
that
but
time of
it,
year when you
if
don't know what to call
if
it.
it feels like 2 weeks of without championship football has already
Yeah.
got me saying that, but yeah, how kind of close he was. I know he didn't get to the final, but
Yeah.
and the semi-finals were ones to forget, but he'll still have that kind of feel of the excitement of it all, and I get what you mean completely. He'd love to really kind of mirror that with Norwich, with potentially any club really, with just that bigger backing, but Norwich seem to be the ones that want him the most out of kind of the sources we've seen online. So it might come on the line. What's your kind of thoughts on the other two contenders, Gary O'Neill and Pep Lijnders?
Uh, well, they're so different. It's
It's incredibly different, isn't it?
I have
Yeah,
to say I'm quite surprised. I think Lijnders, when I first saw his name, I was positively surprised that Norwich were able to attract that caliber of name. I know people have looked at his track record as a head coach and they've said, and probably rightly so, he's not had many more than a few months in both of the jobs that he's had as the sort of the main man. So that's definitely fair enough. Those questions, and I'm not sure he. I don't know if there is that caliber of management that maybe Norwich want a few more guarantees on this time around. But I think the caliber of name is exciting from a Norwich perspective. I know
mm.
it's in terms of the way that things went for him at RB Salzburg, that's not particularly encouraging, but that's a huge club, a Champions League club that wins titles almost year in, year out. He's obviously worked under Jurgen Klopp for several years. He's worked with the very best players in the world when they were the very best players in the world. Uh, and I think it's encouraging that Norwich have been able to attract that kind of caliber to the conversation.
Yeah, it is.
As I
Yeah,
said, I think it would maybe be a bit of a strange appointment, but probably not as strange as O'Neill, which for me completely is it would not be aligned with anything that Norwich are trying to do, and that's why I think it's probably pretty unlikely that they plump for him in the end. Obviously, you can see his record; he's kept Bournemouth up, he's kept Wolves up, he's done a decent job
yeah,
with both of them, and I've got to give him credit because I think just coming from a sort of assistance role like he had at Bournemouth in the first place, then Iraola goes in there and does an amazing job, and you always think, actually, was it sort of the squad and the backing? And he goes to Wolves, and you wonder whether that's the right appointment for them, and he does well there as well. I've got to give him his dues for what he's done as a manager,
yeah.
but again, we know what Ben Knapper's looking for. We know what Norwich are trying to be about going forward, and it's not really that style of football. I don't think it's that sort of style of manager. So I think O'Neill actually deserves a job at this level, but I don't think it's
Just not.
really
Yeah,
right. I think Manning out of the three of them would make the most sense by far.
yeah. No. I think I'd go with that as well.
Yeah,
Just on the basis of, like you say, not following necessarily Napper's vision, Napper's kind of style play and everything. But
yeah,
more to the point of, I don't think maybe we're in that kind of right bracket of trying to get O'Neill. I feel it's one for the newly relegated sides coming
yeah.
from the Premier League down to the Championship. I wonder if Leicester will snub him up and get him. But yeah, I mean, like you say, he deserves his credit, with what he's done in the Premier League. And I remember his time at Bournemouth actually, with Scott Parker originally saying, I don't think there's necessarily the right funds here to really create any. Well,
Yeah.
he said there was an issue with the funds, but he kind of said it's going to make it hard to keep the club up. And O'Neill kind of then stepped in
Did it,
and
yeah.
had the role and just got on with it. And he shows the commitment there. And everything else. So yeah, just getting back onto that list. Obviously, one of the names not on there and revealed in the last day or two was Russell Martin. Do you know as to why he wasn't on the list? Is it just due to the fact of, I know he was one of the favourites at one point to be getting the Rangers job. That looks unlikely now, but I suppose other clubs' interest has probably taken its toll there.
Yeah, well, there's obviously Leicester as well.
Yeah.
A couple of vacancies that are probably realistic for him, but also just a little bit better than Norwich. But we also get the sense that there wasn't really that interest from Norwich as much as he might have better offers. I've got to say I don't really know why that would be. I think Martin would be a much better fit for it than someone like Gary O'Neill, who we obviously just discussed. So I do find that interesting, and I suppose we can talk about the way that the process is unfolded, and that's the sort of information that we try to gather. But in terms of why Knapper didn't even consider him, that's hard to say without being inside his brain. But I've got to say, although it definitely won't be him, I'm a little bit surprised by that because I think in many ways he would have been a fit for what Norwich are looking for.
Yeah, and I think that's for me anyway. I think I'm quite surprised with some of them names on that list, like you were just touching up on there. Like there's a lot of other clubs right now who who are going to be looking for a manager.
Yeah,
Like it's a big change around for not just Norwich but loads of other clubs, even to the point of out of the country like Rangers, and there's other jobs
yeah,
elsewhere. So I am quite surprised that we're seeing Lijnders on the list, Gary O'Neill, Liam Manning. Manning seems to be the more appropriate and realistic option. But I
yeah.
mean, whatever we'll say about Gary O'Neill, I still think that's an incredible kind of candidate to have on that list.
Yeah, I think he has done very good things.
Mm,
And like I said, I think he deserves a job at Norwich's level easily. I think maybe he even deserves a higher level job. I mean, you look at uh, let's say Liam Manning did go to Norwich. I think Bristol City or a team who's just finished in the playoffs would be the sort of level that he'd deserve. Certainly, a team who thinks they can push for the playoffs, maybe even automatic promotion going forward. But I just don't think it's the right fit for Norwich. I mean,
yeah,
you look at this is an extreme example. I'm not saying Gary O'Neill's football is anywhere near this direct or old school, but you look at like a Tony Pulis or a Sean Dyche, what they achieved in their careers,
yeah,
um, and they definitely deserve to go to a higher level than they were at, even at the peak of their careers. You look at what they achieved at those clubs, but ultimately you need that right fit. You need, a club that suits the manager and vice versa. And I think
literally.
Gary O'Neill's a bit of a situation with that at Norwich. I'm not saying he'll never get a job higher than the level of Norwich. I think he probably will as soon as this summer, but you need that profile to fit with the club. I
Yeah.
don't think it did with Dean Smith necessarily, an example of where it can go wrong for Norwich, and I think that's why, although it does seem that he is in the running and he's in the latter stages, that's why I wouldn't be surprised if it's not him that gets the job.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I,
That makes sense.
Yeah, no. I get you completely. I get you completely. I still think Sean Dyche must be absolutely hurting inside seeing Vincent Company bag the Bayern Munich job. Straight after Burnley go down. But
Yeah,
that's a whole other story. So let's just now talk about actual Norwich assets right now. More to the point with the players. We know with not having Premier League football to go to next
yeah,
season, it leaves us a lot weaker to preserve certain top-rated players. It's been a rumor many times before, but obviously Josh Sargent to Leeds is something that we keep echoing here in quite a lot. The more recent one is with Boris Signs, as I'm right in saying Villarreal have shown interest in the Spaniard.
yeah.
What do you know about this?
It's mostly come from the Spanish side, to be honest with
Kind of
you.
thing. Yeah, yeah.
We know that there's a lot of interest in him. There's no doubt. There's no doubt in that. But from reliable Spanish sources, particularly the links have been Villarreal and Athletic Bilbao as well. So
Mm.
I think those two are definitely clubs who have looked at him, who are interested in him, and from what we're led to believe, there's wide ranging interest in him. So yeah, I think it's looking more and more likely that he goes, and I think probably you look at the sorts of numbers being talked about, and that be a real one. I think it was 11 million or 11.5 million.
I think
I think
something like
that's
that. Yeah.
that's probably the ballpark that Norwich are looking in terms of what they want. So I think that's a deal that, and this might be one of your next questions or something that we'll come on to discuss. So sorry if I'm leaping ahead, but I think if you put all of those elements together, it feels pretty likely that a deal gets done for Borja Sainz to leave Norwich this summer.
And the case of obviously, like I said, Leeds is the echoing rumour, but with Josh Sargent, anything there with the American departing the club?
Well, similarly, a lot of interest. I think interest from the MLS that was
Yeah,
uh,
I did read that one
actually,
actually. Yeah, the
yeah,
MLS.
yeah.
Yeah,
Cincinnati bid 20 million for him last summer. The reports from the US suggested that they had actually agreed personal terms as well. So there definitely is that tangible interest. There was last season. He then scored a hatful of goals again this season. So yeah, again, I think it's one where it's maybe trickier to do on the buying side because quite a lot of clubs can probably slap down 11, 12 million. Whereas outside of England, I think it's hard for the sorts of clubs who might want Josh Sargent to sort of stump up 20, 25 million, which is what I'd be looking at for Josh Sargent. Um, Especially when you consider Norwich rejected that 20 million bid. They obviously want more than that. I think the MLS is one of the few leagues that could afford something like that for a player like Sargent.
yeah,
In leagues like Spain and France, you see PSG and Real Madrid and Barcelona to an extent spending money, but you don't really see that second echelon of teams spending a lot of money. You don't see, Sevilla or Athletic Bilbao or uh, Nantes or any of these clubs who aren't in the sort of top three or four in those divisions really spending that money.
no, yeah,
So I'm not sure there are loads of clubs at Sargent's level out there in Europe who could necessarily fork that out for him. But I think if you look at the MLS and England and those two countries and the amount of interest there's likely to be in him, again, I think it's likely that he probably goes, although probably a longer deal, maybe more of a saga taking place there to first of all for him to choose the right club and secondly for Norwich to get the sort of fee they want because we've seen before that Knapper he wants to get as much as possible for those players and he's pretty good at doing that. So yeah, I see that one going a little bit longer maybe if I had to predict it, but again I think he probably is going to be leaving as well.
yeah. Real quickly, just kind of a side question onto that. What's your own opinion with if Josh Sargent goes to MLS? I mean, more the case of just on Josh's own career himself now. Brilliant business from the club, like the kind of figures you're saying there. It's kind of you're licking your lips at that. If you're a Norwich fan, but Josh himself to the MLS. I mean, that's a long project, the MLS that's been going on for absolute years now. But do you think that's the right kind of place he should be, a player of his pedigree and quality?
I'd be disappointed on a personal sort of intrigue level. I'd like to see how he does in the Premier League again. To be honest, I think he's a completely different player to the last time he had a shot there. I think he didn't really play too much as a striker with Norwich in the
No,
Premier League. So
yeah,
on a personal level, I think he could step up, and I'm really interested to see if he could. So I sort of selfishly, out of intrigue, hope that he doesn't go to the MLS. I basically agree with everything you've said there. But I suppose what we also have to consider is uh, footballers are humans as well. And
for sure.
if you or me was living, well, I don't know how many thousands of miles it is from the US, but if you or me were living in the US, and we got an opportunity to move back to England to be closer to our families and to probably get paid two times what we could get paid back in the US. I think it would be tough for us to on a personal level completely discount the idea of going back to England and earning twice as much as we could in the US, sort of thing.
Yeah,
If that analogy makes sense. So I think you have to consider that as well on a purely footballing level. I think if you asked him, he's not gonna at any point say, yeah, the MLS is better than the Premier League. But yeah, we have to probably take that into account. But yeah, selfishly, I would like to see how he gets on in the Premier League. It's a bit like Farker actually.
yeah,
When you mentioned Leeds, I think we're all really intrigued to see how they get on when they're a bit better equipped in
yeah.
the Premier League. So I would like to see Sargent there. Um, it
It
was a
does
bit of a
feel
shame.
like Leeds will be like the team you kind of. I think a lot of Norwich fans will just keep a big eye on next season. Not
Yeah,
necessarily
definitely.
as a second club, not saying that whatsoever, but more of a chance of a they'll probably tune in and
Yeah.
watch them more. I mean, just gotta reverse it then and go to potential arrivals. It's not something as much as I've seen too much online. More kind of about departures, and obviously the main
Yeah.
one being the manager search. And again, like we were saying earlier with the manager search, if like them two key players of ours, Sargent and Signs, if they do depart, I guess with the manager search as well, we'll have to kind of you're going to have to obviously pause what you think about Knapper getting the business about Signs and Sargent, whether yourself as a Norwich fan like me as well agree with them two leaving and what have you. It's about who comes in to replace them. Who do we reinvest that in? And it's one of them questions again. Well, whoever we sign, let's talk about it a year from now after we've seen them in the Championship. But my question is there any other, like, obviously the main one this summer, we know already we need a goalkeeper. That's on the top of the wish list. But is there any links that we've had so far with any potential signings?
I'm struggling, to be honest, because it has been
It's been
pretty
dry,
blown
hasn't
dry.
it? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
I guess
think
the first one, it all counts with who you get as a head coach. That's obviously as soon as that happens, there's other links that come in. But sorry, real quickly, I was going to say, I know a goalkeeper. I think you mentioned on one of your articles, Josh Keeley from Leighton Orient.
yeah.
He looks really impressive, and that'd be one I'd love to get to see if that progresses with the club. But again, it's a gamble with him as a main choice.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Actually, I think I know the article you were referring to, and I was interested to see which one of those names you picked
Yeah,
out of them. But yeah, that's a really interesting one actually, and most of that article was based on that the XG overperformance, or I think the name of the stat is goals saved, or
yep,
something like that. Which is the difference between the post shot XG against and the goals conceded, which sounds like a lot of modern football jargon. So I must apologise, but it's basically how much they the quality of shot they face, how much they overperform the goals that the average goalkeeper would concede, and his numbers were incredible.
yeah, yeah.
So
He's
yeah,
had a real
he's
impressive campaign.
a great season, and then I felt pretty vindicated when I wrote that article. And maybe a couple of weeks later, he saved a couple of penalties against Brad Hill's Stockport to stop them going to Wembley. And
Really
maybe
good game. Yeah,
somebody should hire me as a scout because I called it first. But no,
get in the
that's
job.
a great shout.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I'd be really intrigued to see where he goes in the summer, because I guess the whole links thing, yeah, like I said, there won't be any as yet. Of course, it's the case of when the head coach comes in, but like you said, that touching up on that, I don't know, I wrote kind of about 5 players I'd love to see for Norwich too, and I kind of half mentioned him on there. I think that's a realistic target, and I
yeah,
think he'd struggle to get into as a Tottenham goalie for the future. It's an incredible
yeah.
hard club to get into first team football, but he'd be a real good player to have. Just moving on, looking to wrap things up now, but you have to admit the added work, whether necessary or unnecessary, with this manager search that we've got coming in and in the process of it's obviously down to one person. And I'm going to ask you this now: what's been your opinion on Ben Knapper so far since he's joined the club? Is there too much of a rushed thought process from the sporting director, or is he simply doing the right thing and having the understanding that this industry is a very fast-paced one, and Knapper is just quite simply mirroring that? What's been your kind of opinions on him, mate?
It's honest. It's honestly really hard. I think genuinely that he would admit that it hasn't been the best start to the job for him. I think he admitted that he was culpable for what went wrong with Torrop because ultimately that was his appointment. It was the first appointment he's ever made in his career of a head coach, and I think he acknowledged that the fact he'd sacked him was him acknowledging that he'd got it wrong. So I think he knows it hasn't been the perfect start. I think with some of the players signed, I think he's done actually quite a lot of good work. I know, you look at all of them, and if you break them down in terms of the value and what they've spent, I think Ben Cruzene, maybe slightly underrated as a £1.5 million 21-year-old homegrown fullback.
Mm,
I think he's done pretty well. Anis Ben Slimane only cost 1.4 million, and I think we've seen that there's a player there
yeah,
who
hugely.
certainly needs to come out more often. But we've definitely seen a player there. Ante Sienat has really, really come on, or really, really came on in the second half of last season. And I know there are people behind the scenes who really, really rate him and really think that he could kick on to reach a really, really high level. So I think the transfer business has been okay, maybe ever so slightly underrated. Although I'm not saying by any stretch it's been amazing for the amount of money that they've spent. But the head coach situation is that was a mistake. I mean, you can't say anything other than
Mm,
that.
yeah,
It's one. It, Obviously, he's made one mistake there. Either Torrop was, and I can't really say either way until we first of all see Torrop elsewhere, and second of all, we see how Norwich do after Torrop got sacked. But it's basically the laws of physics or whatever, or theory that either the appointment was wrong or the sacking was wrong. One of them had to be wrong.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so you can't say that Knapper hasn't made any major mistakes. I think his intentions are very good. I really like what he's trying to produce at Norwich. I like possession-based football. I like young teams. I think that's what Norwich fans ultimately connect with a little bit better
Yeah,
than anything else, as much as there are people who want to see something different. So I think his intentions are very good. I think there's a ruthless streak that probably you need,
yeah.
but only time will tell whether he went a bit too far with that sacking and whether he was a little bit too brutal. But yeah, not
It's
amazing
one of them,
start, but I
isn't it?
don't think the end of the world.
Yeah, it's one of them because I mean, it's still obviously time will tell, like you say. Like whether the case of he was being impatient with the whole project and having
Yeah.
the backing and the belief and the faith in Johannes, or like I said, he's just mirroring the industry of football and just thinking fast pace. But like you say,
Maybe, yeah.
the appointments and the signings that we've seen, they've been real kind of long term pictures. Like ones for the future, essentially. Ones to kind of grow and for the club, younger signings, and I do think when it came to Stuart Webber, it was more the case of there were signings happening, but they were kind of for short term fixes. But then again, short term fixes were only happening there because we were kind of fighting with Premier League survival, and short term fixes are kind of necessary in that kind of big division and league. But I guess at the moment, and like obviously Norwich fans can have whatever opinion they want
Yeah.
on this whole situation, but like I said, I think the sense is just to pause with whether you agree with the sacking with Johannes or not. I'm kind of on the edge of I disagree with it myself personally, but like I said to you earlier, it's the case of let's pause that reaction and just see who comes in next, because we've seen it before. A quick kind of, I mean, Bournemouth's the classic example. Andre Iriolai coming in,
Yeah,
replacing Gary O'Neill himself actually, and
that's a good point. That's a good point.
it's been such a and that's a club with, of course, they've had Premier League budget for quite a long while now, but they're even if not smaller than us in terms of just the size, the fan base, everything kind of else. But that turnaround was remarkable, and what he's done this
Yeah.
season has been nothing but great. But yeah, I mean, just kind of one final question on the whole manager search. We do believe it will be in the next 7 days. We get an answer with that.
What day is it today? Friday. I think probably. I don't want to say 100%, but if I had to guess, or if I had to fall one side of the fence, I would say yes. I
Yeah,
think it's at a pretty late stage now, with that finalising of that sort of shortlist. So, yeah, I'm quite optimistic it'll be in the next 7 days, but never say anything for certain at the moment.
and I mean, I don't know about you as well, but the fact it's taken this long, it doesn't really seem to be an issue with me. Let's just get the right person in, at the end of the day.
Well,
And
yeah, I mean,
pre-season
ultimately,
hasn't
what do
started,
they?
and
Yeah.
everyone is on holiday leave as such.
Well, that's it. What do
Let's
you
just get it
lose?
right.
What do
Yeah,
you lose now? Yeah.
completely that, mate. Completely that. Sam, thank you so much for coming on today, mate. I mean, you can read and see more of Sam's journalism and writing with the PinkUn. I'll be leaving a link down below to the website. And if you've enjoyed these kind of style of videos, or a talk with a journalist, or even the fact it's been discussion about Norwich City, then please be sure to subscribe to the channel and also like the video to show your support. It's been a pleasure having you on today, mate. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
No worries, mate. It's been me, Rob, from the Footy Agenda. Thank you very much for you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.